You're going through your to-do list for the day, and then you realize all of a sudden that there's a task, whether it's at school or at work, that's due in 2 days that you haven't even started on. We've all been in that situation where there's something major that we haven't really considered or that we were procrastinating, and now everything's down to the wire and you feel overwhelmed. Most of the time, we end up either failing that task, or if we get it done, it's done very poorly. So, what if I was to tell you that Alexander the Great, we've all heard of him, one of the greatest conquerors to have ever lived. What if I was to tell you that he had situations similar to this, and he had a special strategy that we're going to talk about today that he used time and time again that gave him the advantage and allowed him to succeed in situations just like this. In today's episode of What Sets Them Apart, we are going to be looking at Alexander the Great and the Battle of Gaugamela. This was the battle that turned the tide for Alexander, possibly one of his most major wins in his career, and the win that allowed him to effectively overtake the Persian Empire. Alexander the Great, with his force of roughly 50,000 Macedonian troops, was faced against the Persian Empire's King Darius III, with his, in the most conservative estimates, 100,000 troops, and in more exuberant estimates, up to 1 million troops. With this mismatch, Alexander the Great had to have some special tactics, which we're going to be getting into here in a second. Okay, so let me set up the battlefield for you. So we have the Persian Empire in pretty standard formation. They have a lot of men, a lot of chariots. In some accounts, they had 15 war elephants. So these guys were very, very well equipped for this battle. Right? King Darius III made sure to not underestimate Alexander the Great again. He wanted to destroy him, and this was going to be the battle that did it. So we have the Persians on top, pretty standard formation. King Darius is behind a few lines of defense. This was standard practice for the Persians. In contrast, the Macedonian army comes to meet them with a staggered formation. They were actually slanted. Alexander the Great's side was closer to the Persian Empire, and Parmenion's side, he was one of his generals that was leading the other side of the army, was a little bit further away. They also made sure to curve their flanks inward a little bit so that they would be able to fight back any flanks, anybody that tried to kind of come from the backside, that they would have a better vantage point for that. The Persian king begins to fight Alexander on his side of the battlefield. Small fights begin to happen, and the same thing happens on Parmenion's side, and the middle part of his army is a little bit weak, so they send some chariots toward the center of Alexander's army, but they're able to deal with those. So this is a pretty standard battle so far. The thing is, Alexander the Great hasn't used his key strategy yet. Alexander the Great needed one thing, and he knew he needed this one thing. He needed to kill Darius. The second that he killed Darius, he knew that everything would fall. He knew that the Persian army would lose their morale and that he would be able to overtake them. And so when they were fighting on the right flank with Alexander, and they're going and they're pushing, Alexander begins to realize King Darius is allocating some of his forces toward that side. And he waits for the perfect opportunity, and under the chaos of the battle, Alexander makes his executive decision. Taking a small group of men in a V formation, they go and leave the flank. Mind you, his men aren't doing too great. They're being overpowered right now on both sides of the battlefield. But he knows that all he needs to do is he needs to get Darius. So in a V formation, he goes into the gap that now has been created, and they attack straight to Darius, coming almost face to face with King Darius. In some reports, a spear's throw away. In some reports, Alexander had just missed him. And King Darius gets afraid and he flees. And the second that King Darius flees, his entire army becomes distraught, loses morale, discoordinated. Now their king has left them. And even though Alexander wanted to chase him, he started to chase him. His generals told him, Parmenion is suffering, our army still needs help. And so he decides, okay, let's turn back and let's absolutely destroy this Persian Empire that's now lost their morale. So what's the lesson that we can take away from this? Alexander the Great identified one thing, the most important thing. In odds that completely did not favor him, he knew, I just need the king. I just need King Darius, and I will set up my battle and allow for the opportunity to open itself so that I can get to the king. How can we apply this into our own life? Let's say we go back to the to-do list example. You have a task. It's in 2 days. You feel overwhelmed. How am I going to succeed? How am I going to do this? The thing that we need to take from Alexander, and the thing that made him so great as a general, was that Alexander the Great was able to pinpoint what is the most important thing. What is the thing that, when completed, will allow everything else to fall into place? That's what we need to do for our task. We need to find that one thing, and we need to attack that one thing head on. So let's go through some examples. Let's say you have an essay to write. The most important thing generally when essay writing is to establish an outline. Now, you could spend your days and nights reading up on, research and coming up with ideas and brainstorming and doing all this kind of stuff. But what you really need is you need an outline. That is the most important thing. That is your King Darius when writing an essay. So if Alexander the Great was writing that essay, what he would do is he would write that outline, even if he did not have enough research, even if he had no ideas, even if the outline was complete rubbish and it wouldn't be his actual essay in the end, he would still go, and that would be the first thing that he did, write the outline. Let's say it's for a business that you want to start. You feel overwhelmed in getting clients and prospects. The most important thing for you to do is to interact with prospects, to interact with those clients. So what do you need to do? You need to start sending out emails and making phone calls and doing that on a large scale. You could spend your time researching the prospect, thinking about your pitch, doing all that stuff, and making it absolutely perfect every time you reach out. But Alexander the Great would say no. You need to take action right now, right here, on the most important thing, the thing that could turn it all around, which is getting the prospect, which is making the outline, which is establishing the meeting, being in the presence of the problem in that situation and attacking it head on. So to review what we learned today about Alexander the Great and the Battle of Gaugamela, you need to be able to take a decision, even when facing overwhelming odds. Identify the one thing, not the 5 things that you need to do, the one thing that you believe, if I get this, it'll turn it all around. And you need to go head first towards that thing. Even when you're unprepared, even when you don't feel like it, even when you feel that maybe this isn't the right thing. If you believe it and you think it's the thing that could turn it all around, then you need to do it. And what happens after you attack that thing, everything else falls into place. Everything else falls into place. You can deal with the other stuff afterwards, but you need to make that massive action and get that massive win right now to overtake your own personal Persian Empire. So to end off each episode, I want to give you guys a little bit of homework. Okay, it's going to be a 5-minute piece of homework. It's usually going to be a reflection. It might be an action, and we're going to do this every single episode. So in today's episode, I want you to look across the next 2 weeks. What is the biggest task that you have to do? Something that maybe feels a little overwhelming. Maybe it's an exam. Maybe it's a project. Maybe it's a proposal. Maybe it's some sort of a team meeting that you have to do. And I want you to spend the next 5 minutes after this episode reflecting on what is the one thing, not the 3 things, what is the number one thing. If I do this thing, it's going to turn everything around, right? You might not know for certain, but what's your best guess? And I want you to spend, after these 5 minutes, to spend time working directly on that thing. How do I attack that one thing that is going to turn it all around? And be specific. Get real narrow. What is the number one most important thing? Thank you guys for tuning into today's episode. Be sure to follow us on all platforms. Leave us a comment. What do you guys think about this new format? And I'm really looking forward to it. Best of luck, and I hope you guys are able to set yourselves apart.